Greetings, innovators and leaders. This is AI for the C-Suite, your compass for navigating the exponential age. I'm Chad Harvey, and we're here to bring you cutting-edge insights on AI tailored specifically for middle market organizations. Buckle up as we embark on a journey through the transformative world of artificial intelligence. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Nate DiMemmo, founder and CEO of PivotPoint AI. Nate brings a decade of experience guiding organizations through digital transformation, with 7 years specifically focused on leveraging AI to drive business results. As the founder of PivotPoint AI, he helps mid-market companies harness generative AI and AI agents from strategic planning to practical implementation. Nate's journey began in digital marketing consulting before co-founding Thought AI, where he developed strategies combining AI and blockchain technologies. As Chief Product Officer at Zawacell, he implemented an AI-driven credit rating system for smallholder farmers across Africa, helping increase transactions from 2 million to 20 million in just 1 year. What makes Nate's perspective particularly valuable is his focus on the practical challenges mid-market companies face when adopting AI. He advocates for measured experimentation and strategic implementation rather than rushing into costly transformations. With expertise spanning strategy development, implementation, and ROI measurement, Nate bridges the gap between cutting-edge AI and real-world business needs. His philosophy of slow is smooth, smooth is fast offers a refreshing counterpoint to the hype and fear-based marketing that often surrounds AI adoption. Nate, welcome to AI for the C-Suite.
Thank you for having me.
I am very excited for our conversation. I love working with tinkerers and folks that understand the theory but also like getting their hands dirty. So let's just dive right in today. You've got a much longer tenure with AI than a lot of folks that have kind of jumped up and down and said, me too, in the last couple of years. So you've been working with AI for nearly a decade, yet many mid-market execs are just beginning their own AI journey. Can you share with me what's your framework for helping companies like that develop an AI strategy that's both ambitious and practical?
Yeah, so what we use, we call the 4D framework. 4D is discover, define, design, deploy. And, during the discover phase, that's really understanding who the company is, what level of AI they're at. Have they touched AI yet? How throughout the company is it spread? So we kind of define that, but even during that phase, we start thinking about, okay, what is the entire industry, whichever that company in, how is AI being used, not only at the competitors, but in industry as a whole. So that's what really helps us then to define the strategy going forward of picking some high value use cases. You normally, when you go into one of these rooms, you come up with 30 different ideas. We put that down to only about 3. And then we start building out, simple use cases that we look for high impact on. But the big push there is to understanding the entire process of what it's like building AI, because a lot of people aren't used to the continuous cycle of what an AI model is going to be. Even if you're, Gen AI or traditional AI ML, it's a process to continuously update these models and how they work and understanding that transformation behind that. But, even then it's very contained into a small approach, because one of the things that we try to do is to help our clients learn more about what that entire process looks like. So when we are creating those use cases, we want to make sure that we're getting from the start to finish, that we're getting a good outcome. And then we start to embed those deeper processes into the organization, meaning we bring people on board that may not have a background in AI, but you can relatively spin them up quickly to understand what AI is going to be and the kind of process they have to build behind that. And then, I did the discover, define, design. That was, designing the actual tool and then deploying it. That's actually deploying whatever agent or AI we built into the organization, getting feedback, and then following the same iteration loop that you do with anything else.
Mm-hmm. One of the interesting pieces that you just touched on, it just screamed digital transformation to me. So how often do you find that when you are finding those high value use cases, as you talked about, and defining what reasonable outcomes are going to be, that you actually have to help the organization realign their processes or maybe streamline them to better equip them to take advantage of what you're doing with them in the AI space. And I know that was a complicated compound question there.
No, well, I think that's a very interesting question because especially with generative AI, that kind of has completely changed the processes that people are going to be using, right? A lot of the old workflows, they're just, I don't want to say they're not useful, but there's a lot of steps in there that don't need to be done anymore. So it really is helping them redefine their workflows. I think that's happened at every organization that I've worked with, is that once they get a better understanding of the capabilities of AI, it allows them to completely just change their workflows. And I would say that's a little bit harder just because people, they've been doing it for so long and now you're changing that, which, eventually they get there, but it is a big change for a lot of people. But that is probably the biggest hurdle that we run into is, just people in general, they don't really want to change too many things. And you're telling them, oh, well, you have to completely change this, right? So it's just, as with anything, change management or what, it's just a process that you have to go through.
Yeah. You've just hit on, I think, the Achilles heel of AI adoption right now, which is human reluctance to change, and it's innate. I see it everywhere all the time. It's just hardwired into who we are. We just don't like change. And here you come, and you're saying, not only do you have to adopt this new technology, but by the way, we're going to have to change all your processes as well in order to be more efficient. And I think one of the things that I'm seeing is that reluctance to change is creating a huge gap in the market right now between what is currently possible and what people are willing to do and what they're willing to accept in terms of that change factor. Do you see much of that reluctance or that gap in the organizations that you work with, or are they bought in by the time you walk through the door?
I would say it's a mix of both. I would say about half of them, they're bought in. They maybe just don't know where to start. And the other half, they're still trying to figure out how can AI actually be used in our organization. I think that there's a fair mix of both of those with the clients that we're working with. And again, it's going through the same process, depending on, well, like I said before, where they are on their AI journey. Some of it is just a lot of teaching in the beginning, just for them to understand the limitations of Gen AI or AI in general right now, because there are still limitations, right? As we mentioned, there's a lot of hype out there, which, it's fine, but when you get it in the hands of actual users and people that aren't using it every day, that entire process just takes a while because I don't know if you're noticing this at all, but there's some people that use Gen AI tools all day, every day. And then there's some people that maybe use it once a week. And then there's those people that used it once, it didn't give them a good answer, so now they're just not using it. Right? It's just one of those processes that you have to go through and trying to force them in their habits to just continue to use it to understand what it can actually be useful for.
Mm-hmm. I think that goes to one of the things that we were talking about before the show the other day, which is the mindset shift. And I know that you talked about the mindset of thinking both like a startup as well as an enterprise and kind of adopting the nimbleness of a startup to explore those AI applications. How do you balance that with mid-market companies while retaining the operational rigor necessary to continue to move that enterprise forward?
So as with anything, we like to start with small teams, right? When we come in, we put a team together and we work directly with them, teaching them really how to use the tools, how to build out products or even workflows within automation. And then what we try to get them to do next is expand those teams. So say there was 5 people in that team, they kind of understand the entire process now. So we try to get them from, different departments too. So when they go back to their departments, now they're the AI champion and they can really start leading small experiments. And it goes, and then, the people are smart enough not to go and try to destroy things, right? So they'll start small. We teach them how to build out the KPIs that they're looking for, any kind of evaluations that need to be done to understand if the system's actually working that they're trying to build. So it's that entire process of startup mindset of go out and experiment, but don't go breaking everything, right? You're not going to go deep into the IT systems and start reworking things. No, it's just starting with the workflows, understanding the limitations of AI. And then once the technology evolves enough, then you can start going deeper into the true kind of transformation. But that's also, you're really starting to work on IT infrastructure, which is a much bigger change and will take much longer to do. And there's only a handful of clients that we've worked with that are starting to really think about that. Most companies, I say, you don't really need to think about that yet. Let's just get some experiments out there. Let's get it working. Let's teach the organization how to work on AI. And then we can go to the true architecture transformation, because that's a different whole can of worms. And there's a lot of tools coming out now that are going to make that much easier. And as always, right, you get the cost of the cloud that everyone's already saying it's already way too expensive. It's like, you're going to be processing about 10 times more data. It's going to get more expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. No matter how true Jevons paradox is, right?
But the nice thing is, when you have technologies like this, new companies pop up. I forget the name of the one company, but they're focused on basically SQL databases and make them more efficient. One company that they did work for, they took them from 1,400 servers down to 14.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, there's going to be a lot that's going to change. And that's just how new technologies work. You get the general purpose, and then people build the tools around them to make them more efficient for the enterprise. Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds like you've answered probably about a half to 2/3 of the next question I wanted to ask you, which was this idea of incremental innovation as a key principle that you've raised, and again, in some of our prior conversations. What you just painted for me kind of went beyond, I think, the initial scope of an engagement, but a little bit more tightly defined. What does that first 90 days of AI implementation look like? You talked about the exploration and essentially a train the trainer type of model where you give people access to the tools and then they go out and you develop the use cases. So what's that 90 days look like in a tight time frame? And have you seen, part two here, have you seen any quick wins from your engagements with folks during those first 90 days?
Yeah. So first 90 days, it really is, going through the 4D process that I just discover, define, design, deploy. We define 3 use cases. We'll normally just pick one of those use cases to test first. We have that built out usually within 6 to 8 weeks. And then we get that in the hands of the users. We check it. We make sure that whatever answers it's providing are working well. And then once we have that deployed, then we start thinking about the next use case. But usually within those first 90 days, it's just building out one use case, getting a win, and then moving on to the next one. So I think a good example of a quick win for us was we were working with a retail client. And one of the things, they've been in business for 30 years. They have all this feedback from the customers, but they really weren't collecting it that much. So what we did is just put it all into one one big open AI model. And we just said, what is the core feedback from all this customer feedback, from Twitter to the customer reviews? And then we have an agent that was able to continuously collect all that feedback and make new product suggestions. And then once we had that, within 30 days, they put out a new product from those suggestions, and they were already producing revenue after we got the pilot up and running. Within 90 days, they were producing revenue from it. So it's one of those really interesting things that, because there was a couple more steps there of how they actually tested the product too, which was also interesting because we built an agent around that. That was our next step. And all that really did was, based on the customer questions, we put out product statement or problem statements on Facebook. And it's, just a banner that says a specific product or problem statement that we thought was going to be targeted to a specific customer. And out of those 30 that we put out there, 3 of them tested very well. So we went with those 3 problem statements, built the product around that, and then just started selling it. So there's just multiple ways that you can, and normally that would have taken 8 weeks. That took us 1 week to do. Right. So we were able to find the customer much faster and get a product in their hands a lot quicker than you used to be able to do.
Excellent. We went almost 15 minutes here before you channeled the magic word of the moment, agent, and we'll come back to that here shortly. But I wanted to drill in a little bit more because the example that you just gave us, I think, is very insightful in that it goes to something that I've been seeing an awful lot of, which is traditional ROI calcs, not really getting to the heart of the transformational value that AI can bring. And I think the example that you just gave us was a perfect illustration of that in action, right? That's not something that's traditionally going to be captured by a more standardized type of return on investment framework.
Right.
So with that in mind, and that example in our rearview mirror here, how do you think that mid-market execs should be thinking about measuring AI success beyond cost savings? Because you've got the cost savings, you've got kind of the optimization of workflows, but that's just a tiny piece of it as far as I'm concerned. So,
no, I think that's a good question because, and even now, it's not the easiest thing to go out and explain because you are trying to sell this transformation of what AI can be. And it's not just the cost savings or potential revenue. It's kind of a wholesale change of the entire company and how it's going to function.
Right.
So that one's a little bit harder to sell, but we usually get through to the clients after we show them a couple examples. And then that's when they kicks off in their head, oh, we can do so many different things across our entire company. And that thought really is what I think that's the ROI that I try to hit them, sell to the companies, because that's what's really changing within, especially mid-market companies. And yes, of course, not all of them have, budgets where they can just go and play around, which is completely understandable. So they do want to have some kind of measured ROI, but there are those kind of risks you have to take with implementing a lot of AI. That's been the truth for the past 7 years that I've been working in the space. A lot of it does fail. And, that depends on what failure actually means. Like, is it giving me the right answer or is it just not working as expected? But even in that process, you learn a lot of how to actually build out a lot of these things. And you can use that knowledge to move on to bigger and better things.
I think that is a great answer. I appreciate you explaining that a little bit further because that I think is an area where a lot of folks struggle, quite frankly.
It is, yeah.
So, all right. You surfaced the hot button word du jour here, or maybe it's the word of the year, agent. I know that this is one of your areas of expertise, so let's talk about this a little bit and let's dive in. How do you explain the difference between traditional automation and business workflows that are automated and the more advanced AI agents? So I'm an executive, right? I've heard about this AI thing. I'm not entirely sure what's going on. I've heard the word agent. I think I want it because, all my competitors have it, so I got to have it too. How do you explain to me the difference between traditional automation and an advanced AI agent?
Yeah, so this one, the definition is still evolving for me,
Yeah.
or at least the explanation, because it's changing all the time, right? And there's still a lot of crossover between the two. When you're thinking about traditional automation, right, these are they're deterministic, kind of hard-coded programs, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're thinking about agents or AI agents, which are now coming to fruition, that is, non-deterministic. Probably not the best word for executive, but, it's not deterministic. And it's also much easier to build, but also to get wrong. Instead of having a 16-step process, now it's doing that maybe between 3 agents and it's going to get done faster potentially. So those are the biggest things that I'm noticing. And again, my definition is still evolving because I haven't found the exact words how to explain that very well yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, and isn't that the exciting part of where we are, though, in this technological journey, is we get to invent new concepts and apply old words to new meanings, and everything's shifting all the time. It's a lot of fun, quite frankly.
It is, but it can also get, it's one of those things as with any new technology, right? Everyone wants to put out terminology just so they can get some kind of IP
That's
recognition
right.
there, right? So it's one of those things, and maybe two or more years, there will be kind of benchmark terms that everyone's going to understand. But yeah, we're still getting there. Sure.
Yeah, fair enough. Since we are still getting there, and this is still an area that's evolving quite rapidly, do you have any best practices or recommendations in terms of governance frameworks that companies and organizations should put in place before they deploy AI agents? And maybe governance frameworks is a sterile phrase here. Maybe there's a better term for it. I don't know. I'll have to invent it and copyright it, right? But I think you get the gist of my question there. What should be in place?
So what we usually focus on is the governance comes from what the culture is of the company and what kind of risks they're willing to take and where AI could be used. So really, we just walk them through any kind of, I guess, typical governance is we will create based on their culture and their risk tolerance, we'll just create a document of saying, we'll avoid this. These are the things we'll focus on. And if we are going to deploy something, this is how accurate we need it to be. And here's the whatever checks we're going to do on an occasional basis to get it out the door. We don't focus too much on it, especially during the experimental stage, just because it's not really something I want to have a roadblock around, especially when you're just getting started. After you've built a couple things and you can see how it's working, then you start putting those real governance structures into place. But when you're first starting, it's, just kind of ignore it. I don't want to say ignore it, think about it. And we do put guardrails in based on the culture and what they're looking for, but it's not a big push that we focus on in the beginning.
I'm glad to hear you say that because that goes to one of the things that I've observed, which is organizations putting policy in place that actually has a stifling and a chilling effect on how, you're nodding your head. So you've seen that too. And I've had one or two other guests this issue has surfaced. They've also seen that. So it sounds like you're applying that same type of mindset with respect to the guardrails that you're building in on the back end.
Mm-hmm. That's correct, yeah.
All right. Are there any specific guardrails once you get beyond that experimentation, play, iteration phase and you are starting to deploy an agent? Are there any types of guardrails, again, I'm going to use that term that you surfaced, that you have found generically or generally to be more effective, whether it be a meta prompt or a restriction on certain data or whatever that looks like? Is there any kind of universal advice in that realm that you can give?
It's funny because at this point, no, because it, especially for us, guardrails that we've used at one client for some reason don't transfer over to another one. And it's still one of those things. Yes, you can put in, type of language used to, that's a guardrail right there. They won't answer in specific terms. But other than that, it's still fairly easy to basically, I would say, hack or red team any kind of LLM right now. And those structures are still being put into place. And it's going to take some time for those to be very, I guess, to meet the accuracy and reliability that companies are looking for. They are getting there. And there are many products out there that are good at it, but it doesn't always work. And we're still, especially for us, we're still trying to hammer down on what is kind of basically the basic guardrails that are going to get as accurate, but we're just not there yet on our team.
No, and that's fair. I think that the answer you just gave me is a version of what I always end up saying to folks when they're asking questions about, well, what's it going to cost and how long is it going to take? It depends. Nobody likes that answer, but it's a truthful one.
Yeah. Yep. And especially with mid-markets, it's just hard because, you need to have your budget set so that you can move forward. But with something unproven, it's very hard to be confident in providing a large budget for it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I guess you can always swing higher or pad that budget, but people don't necessarily like that approach either. So, all right. So, switching gears slightly, but still talking about implementation because I think it is a challenge. What are some of the most common pitfalls, maybe two or three that you've seen as organizations drive towards implementing some type of AI, whether it's an agent or a chatbot or whatever it is? What are some of the most common pitfalls that you've seen, and is there a path for folks to avoid those pitfalls?
Yeah, I think, one you already brought up earlier is, putting governance in place before they even build anything, right? That it just very much restricts everyone. And that's one of the first things that, we talk about it, but again, we don't want anything implemented on a governance standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Other big pitfalls is data repositories,
Mm.
especially across departments. A lot of their data is held in different databases everywhere, and it's not very clean. So we're not going in and saying, we have to fix out all the data structures. No, we get a clean set of data. And I think that's, kind of the fix to it is keep it smaller, understand where that actual data is and pull that data that can be used for the agent. And then you can move forward from there. It's not trying to organize this entire 10 different databases to pull all the information, right? We're not going out creating data lakes or anything like that, at least not at this point. And then the third one, I think it still comes down to willingness to experiment. A lot of companies, they're still very hesitant to actually adopt AI or even use it within the workplace. So I guess to that would be, from a general standpoint, one of the biggest pitfalls that I've seen within organizations is restricting the use of LLMs, because there's still companies out there that are doing it. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that you could commit, because one of the things that you really do want to do is have everyone in your organization understanding how these systems work, or at least getting those productivity gains from them. But actually, I guess there's a fourth one too, is within and introducing LLMs that companies, the entire organization can use, they're not providing training for it, right? Because, like you said, it's a mindset shift that people have to go into using it every day. Basically, you have to force these people to use the LLMs every day. And then once that finally kicks in and they understand it, then they're set. But a lot of the times they just throw them out and say, hey, get better at this. That doesn't work, right? You do have to teach people how to use them. You do want them to have a regular habit of using them. And then I think that's probably another big pitfall that I see, is just not providing the correct training behind it. And then that's where you get into those big problems is, CFOs are like, oh, well, we haven't seen anything from this. It's like, well, you gave them this tool. Did they actually use it? Right? That's the biggest thing. And most of the time, most people aren't using them, or they're not using them enough to see the benefits of them.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of scenes from movies from the 80s where the manager comes in, they plop down a computer on the secretary's desk, and they're just like, "Hey, have fun," and they're like, "Well, what do we do with this?" Right? I feel like I've seen that scene a dozen times, and it's the same thing with large language models. To your point, without the training, I think you're just handing them a brick, right? Or in this case, a digital brick, but also without the mindset shift, and you used the word restrictions, right, in terms of how these organizations are handling things. I'm finding an awful lot of entities out there right now are really locking down access to the open platforms, be it OpenAI or Anthropic or Google or whatever have you. And I do wonder, if you're not in a heavily restricted or a heavily regulated environment like financial services, say, or maybe legal, medicine is another one that I think AI has limited role in at the moment due to the regulations there. But if you're not in a heavily regulated industry and you are restricting this, at what point do you then back off and say, oh, okay, we're going to ease up a little bit? Now, the smoke is parting, we can see our way through. Have you found any entities that are reevaluating those restrictions and that are re-examining some of those assumptions that led to the restrictions? Or are they just hammer down, this is how we do it?
Well, I think there's a good mix. There's the people who in the beginning said no, and there's still a no. But then there's some organizations that have, at first it's like, oh, what is this?
Right.
Right? It's like, we can't have this in the ordinance. What if people are putting IP up there? It's like,
Right.
which, by the way, most people aren't.
No.
Really not a big deal. But then, they start to learn more about it. And I would say about half out of all the companies that we would have worked with and, provided some training, out of like the 15 that we originally provided training for, maybe about 5 of them have completely changed their mind of being strictly locked down to, it's like, yeah, you can use it, but here, that's where that kind of more governance comes in, is like, don't put IP on it, just simple things like that. Try to stay anonymous on it, don't use any names, things like that. So those small changes are pretty simple, but with two of our organizations, which I think you're going to probably start seeing a lot more of, especially with the kind of tech driven employees, if they're not given access to be able to use these tools, they're leaving.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's probably going to be one of the bigger pushbacks that companies are going to start seeing, is like, oh, we have, 10 top employees, but we're not letting them use LLMs. They're just going to go to somewhere else where they can use an LLM and also do it much better than the work they were doing there. Right now, I'm 5 times more productive because I'm using this LLM, but I couldn't do it at the previous company. So I don't think that's that big yet, but I am seeing a lot of companies losing key employees because they want to use the technology, but they're not being allowed to.
That is a fascinating observation, Nate. I had not run into that before, but maybe I'm just not asking the right questions. Um, wow. As you were talking there, all I saw were red lights flashing and sirens going off, because I've been of the opinion for quite some time that organizations and entities that don't get on board with this technology are not only going to be at a competitive advantage, they're going to be at a severe competitive disadvantage very, very quickly, and they're probably already dead. And they might not realize it yet. They're just kind of shambling and walking among us. But that point that you made about employees jumping ship for companies that are allowing them to use the technology, and then I assume the old company is just going to hire other people that either don't want to use the technology or can't use the technology, further compounding how far behind they are. That's a really fascinating insight. Is that one of the things? So I'll pivot and I'll shift here a little bit. Is that one of the things that convinced you and your organization to continue to consider expanding into recruiting services? Was it one of those kind of light bulb moments? You're like, aha!
The bigger one there was especially with recruiting, it was more so, one of the clients we've been working with them for 2 years now, but it was kind of ad hoc, build these things out for us. But we got to the point, it's like, you guys should really have an internal team doing this. So we were able to so that's what really started. It's like, eventually you guys got to start building your own teams in-house. Yes, we could continue to do all the work, but it's much better to have these internal teams with people who know the systems and what are being built and have that internally. So that's really where the recruiting came from, not so much from the people leaving. It's no, you just need an internal team, because I I understand that from a cost perspective, especially within mid-market companies, they're not always capable of hiring teams, but that's a place where you eventually have to be. Like, a lot of this has to be internal for anyone to really move forward at a pace that makes sense and to keep up with, well, just the speed of how everything is changing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that begs another question, which is, what are the skills and roles perhaps that mid-market entities need to develop internally versus what should they be looking at outsourcing when we're talking about AI capabilities? So it's internal bench strength and building that out versus going to the pros from Dover and looking outside your entity for certain levels of expertise. Do you have a good sense, or is this going to be another one of those it depends answers?
It's a depends answer, but the biggest thing is, it's everything works on data,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you're starting to get really into systems and you get into AI agents that are actually deployed, data pipelines become incredibly important, meaning what is feeding that LLM with the data and building out those RAG systems. And this comes down to data engineering mostly. I think that's because data engineers normally they're building the architecture to make these systems work, but they also have some data science background and things like that. So data engineer, I usually avoid trying to have a chief AI officer. Almost 90% of organizations don't need one. No, you just need to teach people how to use it. That's usually good enough. You shouldn't be going out and hiring. Really, I don't think an AI officer, and most companies don't need to build their own LLM. I actually highly suggest they don't, because the models out there are pretty good. Any data engineer will know how to fine tune by this point. Um, Even then, fine tuning and some of the services out there do it really well. I mean, you can fine tune a model now in like 10 minutes for $10. So it's gotten very cheap. But having that data engineer, I think, is the biggest thing that we've noticed that's going to really help organizations move along.
Got it. You just surfaced something that I've touched on in other podcasts, but I just realized I've never really drilled into. And we throw an awful lot of terms around, and you just threw out the term fine tuning. And I know that I've used it in conversation with other guests before, but I don't know that I've ever paused to unpack it for the audience. So for folks that don't understand what that is, 2 minutes on fine tuning.
Yeah, so fine tuning is really just using any kind of model that is currently out there and building it for a specific task or role. So you have something like Harvey, which is made for law firms, where it's trained specifically on court documents, or something like LexisNexis, where it's specifically trained to essentially be a lawyer, not a general purpose tool. Now, the funny thing about fine tuning, it's gone back and forth as, right, if you want to be specific, you have to fine tune it. Then the models got really good, and fine tuning was kind of obscure, like you don't need it anymore. And now we're back to the place where, yes, fine tuning actually probably does work well for you. So it's one of those things that's, again, evolving, but it's really just building it for a specific task.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I understand that was kind of like AI 101 for you, but I've got to meet our listeners where they are, not where I wish they would be. So thanks. You also talked about something a moment ago in terms of your position on not hiring a chief AI officer, which I completely support based on the way you laid things out. I think the larger question, though, is executive roles and the evolution of executive roles as AI becomes much more integrated and involved with mid-market organizations. Do you see any new responsibilities or skill sets that C-suite execs and leaders should be developing? I know I've got a personal opinion on this, but I'll hold that back here. We can talk about that another time. What do you think about the evolution of executive roles with respect to AI?
Sure. I think that they probably all need to take a semester course on, on AI, because it is very important to understand what's going on, like not just the final answer that you're getting from the LLM, but what's going on behind that, and what the entire organization is going to look like in 5 years. And that is, it's not too complicated, but it is fairly heavy within, data and understanding what kind of infrastructures are going to be needed and what you can and can't do with AI. I'm not going to suggest you go out and learn how to code. That doesn't, like Python or anything, that doesn't make sense.
Well, Claude will do that for you.
But you should understand the structures behind it and where everything is going. So, again, I was joking with take a semester long class, but you should know kind of the basics of data, where it's being pulled, how it's being cleaned or how it's being used. So I think those are the most important things, and also what the outcomes of being able to build all these systems will be.
I think that that is a very fair answer, and it leads to, as many conversations here do, to another subject or another kind of adjacent question I have for you, which is adjacent technologies and how you develop a forward-looking framework. Because just like execs need to understand this technology so that they can make strategic decisions, there's a lot of other technologies right now that are adjacent to artificial intelligence. Sensors, IoT, quantum computing. Talked about that with my guest, Poppy Manon from Cisco the other week. Blockchain. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on out there. And it's not like these things are all firewalled off and separated from each other. There's a significant degree of overlap, right? So with that said, how do you develop a forward-looking framework, and how do you conduct your environmental scanning so that you are an informed CEO and not one who's got their head buried in the sand?
Right. So I like to use kind of the classic tools, And this comes down to kind of the pestle analysis, right? Where it's just, here's all the different things that we're seeing, across the environment, legal, technology wise. And what, it's not so much what can it do now, but especially with AI, what else does that enable? Right. I think that's the most important part, is understanding what AI can enable. So that means, yes, we're just using simple agents, we're just using a simple chatbot right now, but that same LLM is now, especially a multimodal LLM. Are you familiar with Figure AI, the humanoid company? Right. That those LLM have enabled them to build out a better robot that can actually move, it can see using sensors. So it's all these different technologies coming together as one and making it work, which really wasn't, I mean, it was possible in the past, but it's just working much better now, especially with multimodal. So it's hard, especially if you're not in it all the time, especially when you're, CEO, you're doing a lot of other things. This is where I live. I live in the technology field. So I'm always scanning to see what's happening. So even just, staying up to date with, something like the Future Today Institute,
Oh yeah, Amy Webb's organization. Yep.
or even if you, or ARK Invest, even if you don't believe in her investment strategy, the things that she's looking at are real. So I think that's also a good source of information. And it's just, yeah, continuously scanning the environment. I don't think you need to do this every day. I usually just suggest every quarter, understanding what your organization is, where it can potentially be moving. So if you're heavily in manufacturing, yes, you should be looking at robots. You should be looking at artificial intelligence, but you only have to do that every quarter. It's like, okay, here's our stance every quarter. Do we need to move on this? Yes or no? It's usually going to be no. And then you go to the next quarter. It's like, okay, what has changed? Nothing. Okay, keep going, right?
Yeah. I think that that quarterly review and the environmental scanning makes a ton of sense, and I see too few organizations adhering to that practice rigorously. It's yeah. As somebody that's worked in and around strategy for almost 20 years now, strategic planning for a lot of organizations is neither strategic nor plan. It's an exercise in team building at best once a year, right?
No, yeah, I used to do it too, and there's a reason why I stopped doing it.
So let's talk about this, and I know our time is running short here, so we'll be landing the plane soon. But I want to ask you this: the competitive dynamics that you're seeing out there, and the different technologies that you just surfaced, kind of the environmental scanning piece, all of this stuff that's swirling around, and our conversation about AI. There's a gap that's developing in certain industries and with certain organizations. Are you seeing anywhere in particular where this gap between the early adopters and kind of the medium level adopters and then the late adopters is really growing? Are you seeing any industries or any case studies where you are looking at either an individual company or perhaps an industry that is really going to be at almost an insurmountable competitive disadvantage in the near future?
That's a good question. I immediately go to e-commerce because those have been some of the majority, and that's really just using, even if it's something as simple as, HubSpot's new AI tools, the companies that are adopting those and being able to create much better marketing material and 10 times more, they're getting much further ahead. They're getting indexed on Perplexity and all of these other search tools. And well, I think other organizations, it's going to be a pretty easy lift to get to the same space. It's also creating a really big backlog. One of the things that I've always come into, especially with the people that are like, oh, no, we don't want to use AI. It's if your competitor starts using AI today, and then you're saying, oh, we're just going to wait 6 months. And again, they had 6 months of knowing how to use these systems.
Bingo.
They've maybe built one or two prototypes. They understand the infrastructure that is going to be needed to adopt it company wide. They're starting to think about what their data is going to look like and how it's going to be stored. They're 6 months ahead on that entire process. Now the other people, they're 6 months behind, but it's going to take them another 6 months to even get to the point where that company is. So now your competitor has a year advantage of building out these systems, working with AI. They probably have, a couple things deployed at scale. So it just completely changes the game for people that are actually using it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think changing the game is a good way of looking at it, because it's a new game. It's a very, very different game than the one that folks have been classically trained or kind of on the job training to participate in. So that's a good answer. One of the last questions I wanted to ask you here. Is there any AI technology that you've got your eye on right now that you're particularly excited or enthusiastic about? Could be a model, could be a startup company, could be a specific niche product like Harvey that you mentioned. Anything that you've got your eye on that is particularly exciting for you, and why?
So, I mean, I guess I don't know if well, no, it is exciting for me. Is the new deep research models that are coming out?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Whew. It's like if you wanted to convince any executive why this is important, it's like instead of spending that $60,000 on a market research,
Mm-hmm.
just type it into deep research, and within 20 minutes, you have a detailed report that would have normally taken 3 months to get. And that, like, because I've been an analyst, I've done a lot of research, I've done a lot of market testing and market research, and you know, spending 20 minutes concocting the perfect prompt, but I get 2 weeks worth of research done in 20 minutes. That is one of the most exciting things for me. And there's a lot of topics that I, very interested in, but would never have the time to look into it. I could just prompt that. And it's like, oh, okay, so I shouldn't really be concerned about this. I'll look at it in another quarter, right? So I think there's a lot of things like that that deep research just goes very far in helping in. But that is absolutely my favorite tool so far, other than, humanoid robots. But
Right.
that's
No, you and I are definitely aligned. I was very excited. It's been about a week and a half, 2 weeks since Perplexity rolled out its deep research tool. Full disclosure, we're recording this the end of February, early March 2025, so that ability is relatively new. And I love the export feature that they put in, that you can rip that report out now with either a PDF or I think it's a markdown format.
okay.
Very flexible, but makes it easier. Because I often use these tools in a poor man's adversarial network type of way. I'll start with one, I'll take stuff, put it into another, and that deep research ability is really a game changer. So yeah, I'm with you on that one. So, all right. As we wrap up here, what is one piece of advice that you would give to C-suite executives that are looking to leverage AI in their organizations? Because I know you've given them quite a few takeaways here already today, but what's one piece of advice maybe we didn't cover that you think is needed to be known by the decision makers?
I think that probably one of the biggest things is what I have noticed is that, especially in the C-suite, they're not always connected with the employees,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think it's a very big disservice to not have those one-on-one interactions and actually learning what your employees are doing with these technologies to really understand how they're using it throughout their work, if they're allowed to use it, or if they're kind of the I guess the shadow IT crowd that just uses it but they're not allowed, right? I think that has been one of the biggest things for me, is getting the C-suite to actually truly engage with the employees and understanding how they're using it, because that will help them inform decisions down, further along of how should we be adopting this.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think that goes directly to the heart of something near and dear to me, which is the fact that while we're talking about technology, we're really talking about the interaction between technology and humanity. And it's that people piece that I think leaders always struggle with, even before the invention of computing, right? So very good advice. For our listeners today that want to learn more about you, your organization, the work that you do, how can they get in touch? What's the best way for them to reach out or learn more about you and your company?
Yeah, the best place to reach me at is my email. Nate D at getpivotpointai.com. We are currently we are updating the website. So it's not up and running, but you can email me anytime. We can set up a brainstorming session so free brainstorming session, they usually take about 30 minutes. And that's really just to gauge the customer and what they're actually looking for and how we can actually help them. And then that, if you want to go further than that, then we can go deep dive into agentics, what it can do for your company, what kind of infrastructure you need. And then that's usually rounds up into, okay, we'll build 3 agent use cases for you. Then we'll see how that works out. That's usually how our engagements go in the starting point. Yeah.
Excellent. Nate DiMemmo, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. This was absolutely fantastic.
Well, thanks for having me, Chad.
It was a blast, and I look forward to having you back again at some point in the future. For our listeners, thank you all for tuning into AI for the C-Suite, where we're committed to helping middle market leaders thrive during the exponential age. If you found value in today's discussion, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast, follow us on all the socials, and visit our site, aiforthecsuite.com. Join us next time as we continue to unlock the potential of AI for your organization. Until then, keep your algorithms running, your leadership evolving, and your AI in check. Thanks, everybody.